Hello, random viewer, and welcome. The time has finally come. This iPad has seen better days. It still works by some miracle, not really sure how with a bend that extreme on it, but it was time to upgrade it, or at least replace it. So I purchased one of these newer iPad minis. It's refurbished, so it's not top of the line, but it is going to be good to have. But this is finally the excuse to show how I set up ForeFlight. What goes into installing it? How do you set it up? What settings do I like to select? These are all questions I get a lot. So now that I have a new iPad, I finally have the excuse to go through and show how to actually set up all the settings, get everything tuned just the way you might want them. So I hope you find this helpful. Please know that this is just my way of doing it. This is not necessarily the right way to do it. It's just how I do it. So I hope it helps you, and let's get into it. Even though I am making this video primarily for people just starting with ForeFlight, one thing to be aware of, if you have it on other devices, there is a limit to how many you can have. So here I have my old iPad, and to install it on my new one, I'm going to have to sign out on this one. That is because ForeFlight is good for 2 iPads and 1 iPhone, or 1 iPad and 2 iPhones. I currently have it installed on 2 iPhones, which means I only get 1 iPad. So to sign out on this one, I'm going to go to More on the bottom right, and then I'll go to my account, and then there's that big red button, Sign Out, on this device, and we will go ahead and sign out. And now I'm signed out and should be able to sign in to ForeFlight once I install it on my new iPad. The first step is to actually download ForeFlight, so we will go to the App Store and do that. Just hit the search feature in the bottom right, and of course type in ForeFlight. And I've already installed it once, so it has this cloud icon, but if you don't have it, it would look something like this with a Get option. Just click that to install it, and then we can close the App Store. It will put it on your second page. I don't like it over there, so while it's installing, I'll just hold down on it, and that allows me to move the app if I then move my finger. And you'll keep your finger on the screen, and I'll slide it over here. I'm going to put it, I could put it here, but I think I'm going to put it down here so I can have it on every screen, because when you're in the plane and you need to get to ForeFlight quickly, it's really nice to have it somewhere where it's always displayed. So now if I accidentally swipe to the side, it will still always be down there in the bottom. With the app installed, tap on it to open it. And when it opens for the first time, it's going to have all kinds of things that go on, including notifications about whether or not ForeFlight can use your location. For whatever reason, that is not displaying on my screen, but I'll hit the Allow While Using App. There we go, and I will allow it to do location services. It needs that if it's going to display your position on a moving map. Now, if you do not already have a ForeFlight account, you can create one here. I have an account, so I'm going to click that, and I will sign in. On the topic of subscriptions of ForeFlight, which one should you get? Well, it depends on your needs. If you are working on your private pilot rating, you're a student pilot, you're learning just how to navigate, work with a sectional chart, I don't see a need for anything more than the basic plan. The one feature of the next level that might help you is having your position displayed on a taxiway diagram. But if you need to know your position on the taxiway diagram to find your way around an airport, you probably won't pass your check ride. I've heard of someone being failed because they could not find their way around an airport without that GPS location displayed. So probably better not to upgrade and have that feature. Probably better to learn with the lowest level. Learn how to navigate an airport by using a map, like a map, and move on from there. Now, once you move on to your instrument rating, the next level does have a few features that I find very helpful, such as that profile view of your flight, and having your position displayed on an approach plate is extremely nice to have. It's not required, and you should be able to perform an instrument approach without seeing your position on the plate. However, when you are learning and still trying to figure out what all of the instrument things mean, all these new terms and procedures, it is very helpful to see where you are, and it helps build that situational awareness. Once you get more used to it, you should play with turning that feature off and saying if you can still do the approach. Of course, ForeFlight can never be used as your primary means of navigation. That is illegal. It is only an aid to situational awareness, so make sure you are using the avionics in your aircraft rather than ForeFlight to know your position on an approach. Well, anyways, for those reasons, I do like the second level since I do fly instrument somewhat regularly. So that's the one that I have. With the highest level, you can display an instrument package that gives you attitude, heading, and rate of turn. It can also calculate altitude and a guess of airspeed based on your GPS position and GPS speed. It's not perfect, and of course it's not to be used as a primary means of avionics, but in a total electrical failure, I have heard stories of it saving someone's life. So, if that's something that you would like to have, it costs a lot, but it is there and might be worth it. The choice is yours. This is the lowest level of ADS-B receiver that has the built-in AHRS that makes that emergency instrument display. This is the page for the Century Plus, which is even more advanced. But that's about what that AHRS will look like. Just a bit outside of my price range, so I have the cheapest ADS-B receiver that ForeFlight offers. And so buying the highest level of ForeFlight with that cheaper receiver just does not make sense, because many of the features would still be locked. There's going to be the user agreement. You can read that if you like to. And now we get a pop-up for automatic downloads. This is an option that will allow ForeFlight to download updates to, say, the VFR sectional charts for your area if you have selected to have such a chart downloaded on your device. That is nice to have. If you are using a personal hotspot, that could be a problem if you have limited data on that, but in most cases, it's going to be pretty nice to have automatic downloads there. Now, the first page ForeFlight will leave you on is this, the map page. We also have a drop down here, so I can tap in here and I can type in a route of flight. If I don't want that, you can just hit this FPL flight plan button and it goes away, which gives us more room. So now I can zoom out and I can look around, and it's going to display my location there. And there I am near Greenville downtown. Fantastic. There's also some weather happening around us. So it's fairly simple. One finger on the map moves it around. Two fingers do zoom in and out and can also move it. Another thing you can do is take two fingers and hold them down in one spot. And this gives you a distance measuring thing. So say I want to measure my distance from Greenville downtown to this Foothills VOR. I can just line those up like that, and it looks like it's about 47.5 nautical miles. And if I were going westbound, I would want a course of 265 degrees magnetic. If I was going eastbound, I want 85 degrees magnetic. To make the measuring stick go away, just tap anywhere outside of it, and it disappears. Now, the biggest thing you need to know about ForeFlight is these tabs down at the bottom. This is how you're going to navigate around. So there's an airport tab. I spend a lot of time on this one. And there is also the Maps tab. That's the one we just looked at. There's Plates, which is where you would have an instrument approach plate or an airport diagram if you pulled one up. So right now it's not displaying anything, but say I go here and go to the taxiways button for Oshkosh here. And by the way, you can click on the airport diagram picture here, and if you hit the full screen button, this will take you over to the Plates tab. What I don't like about this is that it does not always have the taxiway names and numbers. It's generally better to, well, let me close that. I can just hit the close button. It's generally better to use this taxiways button over here. This is the official FAA plate, and there are differences between the FAA plate and the ForeFlight one. Anyways, now if I go back to the map screen, still the map screen, and if I go to the plates, now it pulls up the plate that I had previously opened. Documents is a great one to have. So there's FAA documents. You definitely want to have the digital terminal procedures supplement installed if you are instrument rated. This document is absolutely fantastic to have. Here is your, well, it started on page 5. That's kind of funny. So if we scroll through it here, there's your inoperative table for ILS components, if you ever need that. Cold temperature conversion for airports. What your expanded circling radius is, if you ever see that on an approach plate. I mean, this is stuff that is extremely helpful to have because it's easily forgotten. And if you need to remember what it was that you saw on an approach plate or something, well, now it's here. And you can access it at any time in the documents section once you have downloaded it. And that green check mark there means that I have downloaded it. So the first time you click on it, it needs to download. Now it's downloaded. Now I have it. The imagery tab is fantastic. This gives us all kinds of information about what's going on with the weather in graphical format. I personally do not like any of the products in this featured tab. I'm much more fond of these prognostic charts. I guess this one's in the featured, but I like to look at what the precipitation is doing. Looks like there's a warm front followed by a cold front about to move through my area in South Carolina. Probably not a great day to be flying. And over time, that cold front is going to be moving east. Great. I also really like these convective outlooks, looking at the probability of severe storms and even tornadoes. Well, look at that. There's a slight risk in my area. Scrolling down here, there's all kinds of other things like cloud coverage. Looks like a whole lot of overcast. Winds aloft is also nice. There's icing forecasts in here. There's turbulence forecasts. There's even satellite imagery. This is pretty cool. Coming from the GEO satellites over the United States. There's all kinds of things in this imagery tab. I highly recommend spending a lot of time to get familiar with it. We also have the Flights tab, where you can save flights. So for example, the most recent flight that I saved was this Greenville downtown to Chattanooga. There's also a scratch pad if you want to get out of an e-board. So if I click here and do a new one, I can write down the ATIS. So if it was information uniform, wind 060 at 3, I could start writing down all that stuff. And you can write down the rest of your ATIS here if you want to. I'm personally a fan of real paper and pen, so I don't use this feature. Your logbook is in here, so I can look at previous flights. I can look at my currency, so it looks like I'll be good for a while there. I will need to get an instrument approach soon. You can see I only have about 9 days left on my instrument currency there. So that's very nice to have if you keep track of the flights that you've flown. And if you wanted to add an entry, just hit this plus button, new entry, and I can type in the aircraft that I flew, select any of these if I want to, the route that I did, the times, number of landings and approaches, and then it will automatically update your currency. Very nice feature to have. I don't use it to record all of my flights, although some people do. I just prefer to use other methods. If any of the buttons I've just used on the bottom right are missing, you can hit this More option, and it gives you more options. On the iPhone, several of them will be missing. There's just not as much screen available to list them all out on the bottom. I've seen people do their weight and balance in ForeFlight. I've seen them set up all kinds of interesting things. You can even build checklists for your airplanes. Again, I prefer a paper checklist because it's impossible for the batteries to die on a paper checklist, so that's kind of nice. ForeFlight is what you make of it. It has a lot of features. Don't feel like you have to use them all, but also know that if you take ForeFlight to a check ride and you want to use it on a check ride, you are going to have to be proficient with it, or at least the things that you're going to be using it for. So now that we've gone through some of the user interface, let's go back to the map screen and let's set up a few custom settings that I personally like. At the top left, this drop down controls everything about the map. I definitely want the VFR sectional. There we go. We have not saved the sectional for online use. Good to know. US VFR sectional not saved for offline use, see downloads. So what that is saying is we're going to need to see the downloads section to be able to install that. I'm also going to turn off the radar so I can actually see what's going on. And now this map looks kind of weird. This is not how a VFR sectional chart typically looks, and that is because it is currently nighttime, and ForeFlight by default will automatically invert the colors of your chart. I don't like that, so let's hit the settings up here. Invert chart colors. Let's turn that off. That looks much better. That's the sectional chart that I know. Continuing through these settings, you could turn terrain on if that was something you wanted, day-night overlay. I just look through all of these options and pick what I want. So this aeronautical thing, this is ForeFlight's map, so if I turn off the VFR sectional, that map that we saw before, this is the ForeFlight aeronautical chart. And it has a lot of power. I can turn airspace on and off, but I'm going to turn it back on. I can turn off all kinds of things, and I can do custom configuration on it. So if I go into the airspace, has Class E turned off. Well, Anderson has a Class Echo that goes all the way to the surface. So if I turn that back on, aeronautical, airspace, let's turn on Class Echo. Now it displays the Class Echo airspace that comes to the surface. What I like is when this aeronautical chart is on top of the VFR sectional, because on a device, it just makes it easier to see where the airspace is. Also having these labels here for where the altitudes of airspace are, very helpful. With the aeronautical chart turned off, there's our classic VFR sectional. It can be a little less clear, especially in an area like Greenville where there's so much stuff just in the way of the airspace around the airport. If I turn the aeronautical chart back on, much easier to see how much of Greenville cuts into, say, Donaldson's airspace. A few other settings I like to have, scrolling down in here. Track up forward, I don't like that because when I'm flying around it'll flip my sectional chart upside down and I can't read the labels. So I like to always have north up. That's just me, you don't have to do that. Extended center lines is kind of nice. That will show runway center lines for airports in your flight plan. So I turn that on and you'll notice that nothing happened. But say I put in a route from GMU, I always do that, I'll hit the space instead of the M when I go too fast. GMU to Donaldson, or Greenville downtown to Donaldson. And now you can see it's drawn these extended center lines on the runways of those airports, which makes it nice and a little bit easier to line up with things, or at least to have more situational awareness of the runways that are there. Of course, you should be doing that research yourself before the flight. ForeFlight is not a replacement for your planning and good judgment, but it helps. Ownership distance rings. I like this because it shows rings of distance. I know that my own personal visual range is only about 3 miles for light aircraft. I cannot see a Cessna 172 more than about 3 to 4 miles away. So these rings help. Now if I see an airplane over by Williamsport displayed in the traffic, and I can turn that on. If I hit the traffic button here, yes, I understand that it's not a replacement for my eyes. There we go, now it displays some traffic. That UAL at 35,000 feet, roughly 5 miles from me, I might see that, but if it were a Cessna, I wouldn't. You can also tap on those other airplanes, get some information about them. Glide advisory, that's kind of nice to know your distance. I'm personally not a huge fan of it. Breadcrumbs you do want on if it's going to track your flight and draw a green line behind you of where you've been and what your flight track looks like. So I like to have that on. Map legend, I haven't really figured out what that setting does. I can't find a difference if I turn it on or off. I'm probably doing something wrong. NOTAM settings, I can control which NOTAMs are displayed if I have NOTAMs turned on. But those are a few of the settings I like to have on that I just went through. You don't have to do it that way. It's your choice. Now, another thing that we should set up is which overlays are going to be displayed. You definitely want your VFR sectional chart at most times. The aeronautical chart's nice to have. I can turn AirMets and SIGMETs on. And now you can see just how much, how do I say this, instant death is going on in our area right now. IFR, icing, mountain obscuration, more IFR, more icing, turbulence, IFR, and more turbulence. Oh, at least they removed the low-level wind shear AirMet. But, yeah, that's a bit much. You can turn these things off individually, so I could turn off just the icing AirMets if I wanted to do that. So, AirMets are nice to have, but when it's a day like today that is awful, I'm just going to leave it off so I can actually see the map. I like to have lightning turned on so that I can see where lightning strikes are happening. I like to have PIREPs turned on so I can see what other pilots have reported. Make sure temporary flight restrictions and NOTAMs are turned on. Those are very important. I'll also turn on my user waypoints so I can see some of the places that I've marked out. But you can turn that off too. You can turn obstacles on if you want to see where those are. That's getting a little cluttered for me, so I'm going to turn them back off. And radar is kind of nice to have. When you turn on radar, it gives you this slider down here. I can see what it was doing a few minutes ago and then slide through it. I can hit the play button if I want to. It gives me a key for everything. It's great. One thing you definitely want to do while you're in here to get it set up properly is to hit the flight plan button. And then if you have the second level of ForeFlight, you should be able to hit this profile button here. And that doesn't look quite right, does it? Let's do a longer flight, shall we? We'll go back to Edit. Let's do Greenville downtown to Concord, why not? I can select the airplane I want to fly. Let's do the Alaris. There it is. We'll select the aircraft I want. I can select my cruising altitude. It'll even calculate what kind of tailwind I get. Wow, 33 knots up at 11,500 feet. I don't think the Alaris will get that high, but 7,500 sounds nice. That makes sense for an eastbound flight. There we go. So if I go to the profile view, it's going to show the side view of my route. It's going to show how much distance it takes to climb, where I level off, when I should start descending, the airspaces. But one thing I really want to hit here is this settings option. Make sure your corridor width is set to 8 miles. I'm pretty sure it's 4 miles by default, but for IFR regulations, it needs to be at 8 miles if you want to use this. The reason I say that, when you are flying off route, so here on this route, I am not using an airway, I'm not using a standard IFR route, and if I switch this over to the IFR chart, you can see that. Wrong button. So I'm doing an off route, or random routing. With random routing, legally you must stay 1,000 feet above the top of the highest obstacle within 4 miles on either side of your aircraft. Here I can see at my cruising altitude, and in fact over the entire route, the highest point within 4 miles of my course is 1,847 feet. I am well above that. Oh, and of course that minimum obstacle clearance increases to 2,000 feet in mountainous areas, which we most certainly have to the north of Greenville. The next thing we need to do is set up some downloads. So I'm going to go to the More option here, Downloads, and then what I want to do is go to Region Settings. Notice that I have nothing selected in the United States. I live in South Carolina, so I'm definitely going to want South Carolina stuff downloaded. So let's select that. I'm also very close to the North Carolina border, so I'd probably want some things downloaded for North Carolina. Also in the Greenville area, we're close to the Georgia border, so if you have the storage space for it, go ahead and download the areas that are going to make sense where you're going to be flying. So if I go back to the downloads, we can see where this is downloading taxiway diagrams and airport facilities directories, chart supplements as they're called today. It's doing terminal procedures, it's doing VFR charts. So see this warning at the top? IFR low not saved for offline use. Well, that's about to disappear now that I've selected to have downloads for South Carolina. Now you can change your settings in here as to what it downloads. So if I hit data settings, notice that I don't have IFR high charts selected. If you're flying a jet, you might want to go ahead and turn on that IFR high chart. If you're not even IFR rated at all, you might want to turn off the IFR low chart. That way you're not wasting storage space with something you're not going to use. Optimize this for your needs and your piloting. So there we go. Now we have the basics of ForeFlight set up. Entering aircraft is a whole other thing. You would hit your flight plan button, go back to edit, aircraft, you can add a new airplane, you can put in the tail number, set up the ICAO equipment for filing a flight plan. You can even file flight plans in ForeFlight. I'm not going to go into too much detail about actually doing a flight, getting prepared for one in it. I might do that at a later time, but I just wanted to, in this video, give a basic idea of how to get ForeFlight set up to where you can start using it. So hopefully that gave you a pretty good idea of some of the features and how to get the settings personalized for your needs and set up to be as helpful as possible. So thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a very nice day.